The elevator doors slid open, and chaos stepped out in the form of a young woman with a crooked bun, a coffee stain on her sleeve, and panic written all over her face. Nora Hayes was late. Her heels clicked unevenly against the marble floor as she half walked, half ran through the hallway of Ward and Harlan Holdings. In one hand, she clutched a folder of resumes and references that now had a faint imprint of her latte. In the other, she held her phone, which had just buzzed a reminder, interview with Ethan Ward, 9 a.m. It was 9:17. By the time she reached the glass door with the silver nameplate, Ethan Ward, CEO, she had already lost count of how many times she whispered, "Oh my God," the receptionist gave her a polite but pitying look. "You're late." "I know," Nora breathed, trying to fix her hair with one hand and smooth her wrinkled skirt with the other. "But I'm determined." When she stepped inside the office, the temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Ethan Ward looked up from his laptop. Tall, impeccably dressed in charcoal grey, with the kind of calm intensity that made the air feel thinner. His eyes were sharp, calculating. There was no visible irritation, which somehow made it worse. "You're 17 minutes late," he said. His voice was even, but it had the weight of final judgment. Nora froze. "Technically 16 and a half. He didn't smile. Of course he didn't. For a moment, silence filled the room, interrupted only by the faint hum of the city below. She realized with a sinking heart that there was a post-it note stuck to her shoe. She tried to discreetly kick it off, only to send her folder spilling open across the polished floor. If there had been a most disastrous entrance award, she would have won it by a landslide. Ethan exhaled, not loudly, but enough to make her stomach twist. "You understand this position requires organization, punctuality, and composure, Miss Hayes." "Yes," she said, kneeling to gather her papers. "I'm organized, in spirit, punctual in theory. And as for composure," she looked up at him with a sheepish grin, "that's a work in progress." He tilted his head slightly, as if deciding whether this was incompetence or insanity. "Why should I hire someone who clearly can't manage her own morning?" Nora hesitated, then placed the last sheet back into her folder and stood up straight. Her voice was calm when she answered, "I'm not perfect, Mr. Ward, but I'm real. And I don't quit easily." Something flickered in his eyes. Not amusement exactly, but interest. For years, Ethan had interviewed flawless candidates. Polished, rehearsed, predictable. He'd fired more assistants than he could remember. But this woman, with coffee on her sleeve and honesty in her eyes, was different. He leaned back in his chair. "You have 1 month." Her eyes widened. "1 month for what?" "To survive me," she blinked. "And if I do?" A faint smirk crossed his lips. "Then you stay." Nora exhaled, unsure whether she'd just landed a job or a sentence. But as she walked out of the office, heart pounding, one thing was clear. This wasn't just another interview. It was the beginning of something that would turn both of their lives upside down. By 8:30 the next morning, the entire 23rd floor already knew her name. "New assistant," someone whispered by the printer. "Won't last a month," another replied, not even looking up from their screen. Nora Hayes walked in holding a cardboard cup of coffee and her employee badge that was still blinking red because she hadn't figured out how to scan it properly. She smiled anyway. Her desk was right outside Ethan Ward's glass-walled office, an aquarium of productivity. She could see him through the glass, head bent over his laptop, completely still, like a statue carved from steel and discipline. She whispered to herself, "Okay, Nora, just breathe. Don't break anything." By noon, she had broken 2 things, the intercom system and her own confidence. While trying to transfer a call to the accounting department, she accidentally rerouted every line in the building into Ethan's office. Phones rang simultaneously, echoing like a fire alarm through the executive floor. "Ward," Ethan answered one, his voice tight.
Then another?
Then another. Nora froze, staring at her phone as if it might self-destruct. When he finally stepped out, calm but deadly, she blurted out, "It's okay, I fixed it."
I think he said nothing.
Just looked at her the way one looks at a malfunctioning robot. Then he disappeared back into his office. By 2 p.m., she'd accidentally signed off on a contract draft that wasn't meant to go out. It was supposed to be a test file. She panicked, ran to Ethan's office, and confessed everything in one breath. "I think I just sent a fake contract to Harlan Technologies."
Please don't fire me. Or do, but maybe check it first because I might have actually saved you a lawsuit. He frowned, snatched the document from her hand, and scanned it.
His eyes narrowed, not in anger this time, but in realization. The draft included a clause that, if left uncorrected, would have cost the company $15 million in royalty penalties. He looked at her again.
You found this by accident?
She nodded, sheepish. Technically, I caused the accident, so yes. For a moment, something unfamiliar flickered across his expression.
Amusement? Respect?
He wasn't sure. He leaned back, crossing his arms. "You're either a walking disaster or the luckiest employee alive. Why not both?" she said, smiling carefully. He almost smiled back, or almost. Later that day, he found her in the break room trying to reprogram the coffee machine because it needed more optimism. "You don't need to fix everything, Ms. Hayes," he said. She looked up, wiping her hands. "With all due respect, you don't need more systems, Mr. Ward. You need air." He stared at her.
Air? Yes, she said simply.
"People, space to breathe. This place runs like a machine, but nobody looks alive." For the first time in years, Ethan didn't have a comeback. Her words followed him back to his office, echoing in the quiet like an unwanted truth. That night, long after everyone had gone home, he sat alone, staring out at the city lights reflected on the glass wall. For the first time, he noticed how silent everything really was, and for the first time, it bothered him. The next morning, Nora showed up early, or, as she called it, on time by redemption standards. She carried 2 cups of coffee and a hesitant smile. When Ethan walked in, he found 1 cup waiting on his desk, steam curling into the cold morning light. A small note was taped to the lid. "For you. Tastes like happiness? Probably." He lifted the cup, sniffed it, and took a sip. His expression tightened instantly. "It's too sweet," he muttered. "Too sweet?" Nora blinked. "That's called flavor, Mr. Ward." "It's called unprofessional," he shot back. "I prefer black." "Well," she said cheerfully, "maybe that's the problem." He stared at her, trying to decide whether she was brave or just hopelessly naive. In the end, he said nothing, only pushed the cup aside and returned to his laptop. By noon, however, she caught him taking another sip. He didn't comment, and she didn't say a word. But she smiled to herself anyway. Over the next few days, something strange began to happen. Ethan stopped snapping at her. She reorganized his calendar, color-coded, chaotic, but somehow efficient. She added a plant to his desk, claiming, "It'll help your blood pressure." When he didn't remove it, the office started whispering. He even let her take control of smaller meetings, quietly observing her quick wit and unconventional thinking. Nora didn't follow corporate rhythm. She danced to her own tempo and, to his surprise, it worked. By the end of the week, she had rearranged not only his schedule, but also the very air around him. The annual company gala arrived faster than either expected. Ethan hated such events. Networking in tuxedos, he called it, but his assistant was unfortunately required to attend as part of the executive board. "You're coming," he said, flatly. "I don't have anything fancy to wear," she protested. He looked up from his tablet. "Then improvise. You're good at that." That night, when she walked into the ballroom, the crowd actually paused. Nora wore a deep red dress, elegant, but with a few imperfections that made it unmistakably hers. She looked both terrified and radiant. Ethan turned at the sound of her heels. For a moment he forgot to breathe. "You clean up well," he said quietly. "You sound surprised." "I am." They barely had time to speak before she nearly tripped over a waiter's tray. A tower of champagne flutes tilted dangerously, and for a split second it was déjà vu of every disaster she'd ever caused. But Ethan caught the tray before it fell. Glasses clinked, not one breaking. Instead of scolding her, he asked softly, "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, flushed. "Only my pride." He smiled. It's an actual, genuine smile, and offered his arm. "Come on, let's get some air." On the balcony, the city stretched out below them, glittering under a velvet sky. They stood side by side, the sound of music muffled behind glass. For the first time, Nora saw the man behind the CEO. Ethan talked about the jazz his father used to play, the silence of boardrooms, the loneliness of always being the one in control. And she listened, really listened. When he finally fell quiet, she said, "You should smile more. It makes you look human." He laughed under his breath. "Dangerous advice, Miss Hayes." "Then maybe danger's what you need." The wind lifted her hair, brushing against his shoulder. Neither of them spoke again. They didn't need to. Something unspoken had begun. Not a declaration, but a quiet, undeniable shift. It started with a phone call. "Dinner, tomorrow, 1 p.m. sharp," Ethan's mother, Victoria Ward, announced without preamble. He pinched the bridge of his nose. "Mother, I have no excuses."
"You're 35.
"You run an empire, not a family."
I have arranged for you to meet Caroline Ashcroft."
Her father sits on the board of Mother. His tone was warning, clipped, but she didn't hear it, or chose not to. When the call ended, Ethan leaned back in his chair, exhaled sharply and muttered, "Perfect." Nora, who had just walked in carrying a stack of reports, frowned.
"Bad news?"
He looked at her, eyes narrowing. Then, without thinking, the words tumbled out.
"You're my girlfriend." She froze mid-step. "I'm sorry, what?"
He rubbed his temple. "Long story short, I may have told my mother I'm dating someone." "Someone? Who works for me?" Her eyebrows shot up. "You told your mother you're dating your assistant?" "Genius move, boss." "I panicked," he admitted flatly. "And you were conveniently standing there." "Oh, wonderful." "I always dreamed of being a convenient lie." He met her eyes, half pleading, half desperate. "Just lunch, 1 hour?" "I'll owe you," Nora sighed, crossing her arms.
"You already owe me about 12. The next day."
She showed up at the upscale restaurant looking entirely out of place. A soft cream dress, curls falling naturally, nervous but radiant. Ethan was already seated with his mother, who looked every bit the queen of high society. Pearls, posture, and piercing gaze. When Nora approached, Victoria's eyes widened slightly, perhaps expecting someone polished. Not this warm, awkward woman who tripped over the chair as she sat down. "I'm so sorry," Nora exclaimed, cheeks burning.
"These chairs are too fancy to function." Victoria blinked, then surprisingly laughed.
A small, genuine laugh. Throughout lunch, Nora didn't pretend to be sophisticated. She spoke honestly about growing up with a single mum, about learning things the hard way. She complimented the soup, made a self-deprecating joke about spilling coffee on Ethan's laptop once, and somehow the atmosphere softened. When Victoria turned to her son, there was something almost approving in her eyes. "She's real, Ethan," she said softly. "That's rare." Ethan didn't answer. He just watched Nora, really watched her, as she smiled politely, completely unaware that she'd just disarmed the most impossible woman in his life. After lunch, as they stepped out into the sunlight, Nora exhaled. "Well, that was mildly traumatic." "She liked you," Ethan said. "She likes dogs and museum donations." "I don't think I qualify." He shook his head, a rare grin tugging at his mouth. "You surprised her." "And you?" she asked. "Still think I'm a convenient lie?" He paused. "Not anymore." She looked at him for a long moment before smiling faintly. "Careful, Mr. Ward. You're starting to sound almost human." A week later, during a crucial investor meeting, Ethan was called away unexpectedly. The presentation that could save the company, a multi-million-dollar campaign, was about to collapse. Without hesitation, Nora stepped in. She took the stage, voice steady, energy alive. She improvised a new angle, bold and heartfelt, that turned skepticism into applause. When Ethan returned, the CEO of the partner firm said, impressed, "That young woman of yours, brilliant." Ethan only smiled. "Yes, she is." That night he promoted her, officially naming her creative director. From that day on, they weren't just CEO and assistant. They were a team, unpredictable, dynamic, unstoppable, and somewhere between deadlines and stolen glances, a quiet truth settled between them. What had started as a lie had somehow become the most honest thing either of them had ever felt. Success had a way of turning into poison. Within weeks, Nora became the face everyone in the company knew, the miracle strategist who saved a multi-million-dollar deal. Her presentation was replayed in meetings, quoted in magazines, praised in shareholder letters, and with every bit of praise came whispers. She must be sleeping with him. No one gets promoted that fast. Collins has finally picked his favorite toy. At first, Nora ignored them. She focused on work, on keeping her head down, but whispers had a way of growing teeth. Soon, she couldn't walk through the hallway without feeling eyes on her back. Then came the email, anonymous, venomous, sent to the board of directors, a complaint questioning the ethics of Mr. Collins's personal involvement with his subordinate. A board meeting was called mandatory. The conference room was colder than usual that morning. Nora stood at one end of the long glass table, hands trembling as she clutched her notes, though she had nothing to defend except her dignity. Across from her,
Ethan sat still, unreadable, his jaw tight.
Eyes fixed on the table. The chairman cleared his throat. "Miss Bennett, can you confirm the nature of your relationship with Mr. Collins?"
"There's no relationship," Nora said firmly.
Her voice didn't shake, not yet.
"Everything I've achieved here is because I worked for it," a woman from HR snorted quietly. "And because you had private dinners with the CEO?" Murmurs erupted. Laughter, cruel and smug. Nora felt her throat tighten.
Those were work meetings, but the words drowned under another voice. Convenient excuse? She turned to Ethan, the one person who could stop this, who could stand up and tell the truth. He met her eyes for a second, then looked away. The silence was deafening. Something inside her cracked. "You know what hurts most?" she said quietly, her voice trembling now.
"Not what they say. It's that you let them." Ethan opened his mouth, but she didn't give him the chance. "You're exactly what I thought you were," she said, tears finally spilling over.
A robot in a suit, she tore off her badge, dropped it on the polished glass, and walked out, past the whispers, past the cameras, past the empire they'd built together. The sound of the door closing echoed like the final note of a requiem. Days turned into weeks. Nora disappeared from the city. The office felt hollow without her laughter, her post-it notes, her stubborn optimism. And Ethan, the man who prided himself on control, began to unravel. He stopped showing up to meetings. Investors pulled out. Contracts were cancelled. One by one, the partnerships she had saved began to crumble. He stared out from his corner. Office one evening as the city lights flickered below, a skyline that once
felt like his kingdom now looked like a graveyard of
everything he'd lost. Her words haunted him. "You're a robot in a suit," he realized too late. That she had been the one thing that made him feel alive. Now,
all he had left was silence and a world drained of color.
the smell of hay and rain hit him first. Ethan Collins, the man who once ran a billion-dollar company with surgical precision, now stood at the edge of a muddy animal rescue farm. wearing a charcoal grey Armani suit and clutching a bouquet of white lilies that were already drooping in the drizzle. He wasn't sure what he expected. Maybe Nora turning around with fury. Maybe the door slamming in his face. What he didn't expect was a small piglet running toward him at full speed. Oh, for the love of... The next thing he knew, he slipped on the wet ground, his shoes sinking into the mud, the bouquet flying into the air. He landed flat on his back, splattering mud all over his suit. The piglet squealed triumphantly, snuggling against his arm as if claiming victory. Somewhere behind him, a voice broke into laughter, soft, incredulous.
Half in tears, Nora stood by the fence.
Hair tied messily, sleeves rolled up, wearing a faded flannel shirt. She had hay stuck to her jeans and sunlight on her face. For a moment, Ethan forgot how to breathe. She covered her mouth, trying to stifle her laughter.
You look
Ridiculous, he glanced up, mud dripping from his hair, and gave a crooked smile. That's fair.
I didn't come here to impress anyone. He tried to stand, but nearly slipped again, making her laugh harder.
By the time he managed to balance himself, she was already beside him, offering a hand. Hesitant, but there. He didn't take it right away.
Instead, he knelt back down, this time intentionally. Mud soaked through his trousers, but he didn't care. Nora, he said quietly, his voice trembling. You were right.
I was a coward. Her laughter faded. I let them destroy you because I was scared. Scared of losing control, of being seen as weak. But the truth is,
his voice broke.
I've never felt weaker than when you walked away. She stared at him, the breeze lifting strands of her hair. Ethan swallowed hard, mud dripping from his sleeve. I'd rather fall 1,000 times in the mud than lose you again. Silence stretched between them. Just the soft snorts of pigs and the rustling of wind through the barn. Then she knelt too, her knees sinking into the same mud. You really are terrible at speeches, she said softly. He exhaled a shaky laugh.
I'm better at action, her eyes glistened. Then prove it. I will. She looked at him for a long moment, then finally smiled. Small, fragile, but real. I forgive you, she whispered, voice barely audible over the wind.
But next time, Ethan, he leaned closer, afraid to breathe. Next time you defend me in public, she said, not in private. He nodded, his throat tight. Deal. A drop of rain landed on her cheek. And she laughed again, the sound light, free, the kind of laughter that made him believe in second chances. Behind them, the piglet squealed, bumping against Ethan's leg. He looked down, then at her, and murmured, Guess I'm officially part of the herd now. She rolled her eyes. Welcome to real life, Mr. Collins. And as they stood there, covered in mud but surrounded by light, it felt like both of them, for the first time in years, had finally come clean. The following Monday, the headquarters of Collins and Blake International buzzed with a strange kind of energy. Expectant, tense, almost electric. No one knew what to make of it when the CEO himself walked into the boardroom with Nora Evans by his side. She wore a simple navy dress, hair tied neatly, calm and steady as ever. The room fell silent. Some in guilt, others in awe. Arthur Ethan Collins took the microphone. His voice was clear, firm, stripped of the practiced polish it once carried. I owe this company an apology, he began.
And I owe this woman the truth, gasps rippled through the room.
He turned to Nora, his gaze unwavering. She's not just the best strategist we've ever had. She's the reason this company still has a soul. A stunned silence. Then a hesitant round of applause that grew into thunderous clapping. Some executives lowered their heads in shame. Others smiled with relief. Nora's eyes shimmered, and for the first time in months, she didn't feel like she was defending herself. She was simply standing where she belonged. After the meeting, journalists swarmed the lobby. Headlines exploded online. CEO publicly defends ex-assistant in emotional company address. From scandal to redemption, Collins and Blake's heartwarming turnaround. And within a week, the company's stock and morale began to climb again. A month later, under the golden chandeliers of the Winter Gala, Ethan and Nora stood on stage together. The hall was filled with clients, investors, and employees, but for them, it felt like the world had narrowed to just two people. Ethan raised his glass.
"To second chances," he said, voice steady. "And to the woman who taught me that leadership isn't control, and it's courage." Cheers filled the room.
Nora smiled, shaking her head. "You always did have a flair for drama." "Only when it's worth it," he murmured. The orchestra began playing a soft waltz. Nora tried to slip away quietly, but Ethan caught her hand.
"Dance with me," she blinked.
"Here, in front of everyone?" He smiled. A real smile this time, one that reached his eyes. Exactly where everyone can see. They moved together across the polished marble floor, the music swirling around them. Conversations faded. All eyes turned toward the unlikely pair who once argued over coffee and chaos. "You turned my world upside down."
"Harper Evans," he whispered. "And I'd do it again," she replied, her voice full of laughter. He looked down at her,
realizing how much lighter life felt now. Like he had finally exhaled after years of holding his breath as the final note of the waltz lingered. Ethan leaned close, his words barely audible over the applause. "Thank you for making me human." Nora met his gaze, eyes warm. "You were always human, Ethan. You just needed someone to remind you." They stood beneath the soft glow of the chandeliers, the glass walls reflecting their silhouettes. Two figures, once broken by pride and silence, now whole again through truth and love. And as the applause swelled and the lights dimmed, the once cold CEO and his former assistant shared a quiet smile, proof that even the most guarded hearts could find their rhythm again.